Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The world had changed overnight. What was once a vibrant city now lay submerged beneath the relentless tide. Buildings that had once touched the sky now stood half submerged like forgotten monuments of a lost civilization. The streets, once full of bustling life, were now underwater canyons home to creatures that lurked in the deep. Jake Reynolds floated on the surface, his breathing slow and measured through the regulator in his mouth. The cold Atlantic currents tugged at his wetsuit as though the ocean itself was eager to pull him down to the sunken streets below. He scanned the horizon, looking for a glimpse of something familiar amidst the towering wave. His mind flashed back to the day it all began. The news had been full of warnings, melting ice caps, tectonic shifts, sea levels rising. But no one had anticipated the scale of what came next. The tsunami had arrived without mercy, swallowing coastal cities whole. Jake had been on the shore when it hit, his family only blocks away at their apartment. He had tried to get to them, but the floodwaters swept him away before he could reach Lena and Emily. Now, all that remained of the life he once knew was hidden beneath the waves, and somewhere in those drowned streets, his family was lost. Jake adjusted his dive mask and rolled backward into the water, plunging into the dark, cold depth. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained focused. He couldn't afford fear, not now. The underwater city was a maze of broken streets and fallen debris. Cars were half buried in sediment and shattered glass floated like confetti. Jake swam through the ruins of what was once downtown, weaving through the wreckage as he descended deeper. His oxygen gauge flickered in the corner of his vision, 3/4 full. He had time, but not enough to waste. He swam past the collapsed skeleton of a high-rise where shadows moved among the wreckage. His pulse quickened as he recognized the shape schools of fish, larger than they used to be, their slick, muscular bodies darting in and out of the submerged ruin. They weren't the only things lurking here. The ocean had changed, too. Suddenly, a dark shape flickered in his peripheral vision. Jake froze, gripping his spear gun tightly. His eyes strained to see through the murky water, but there was nothing, just his mind playing tricks on him. He couldn't afford to be paranoid. He had a mission, and he wasn't going to let fear distract him. But the silence of the ocean was deceptive. He swam deeper into the city, passing what used to be his neighborhood, now a sunken wasteland. His heart clenched as he saw the familiar landmarks, the grocery store where he and Lena would shop every Sunday, the park where he pushed Emily on the swing. All of it was submerged, and worse, it was deserted. There were no signs of life. A glimmer caught his eye. Jake swam toward it, his heart leaping in his chest. It was a car half submerged, the headlights still faintly glowing in the depth. Inside, he saw movement, a hand, no, a glove, drifting like it had been abandoned. His heart sank as he realized it wasn't his family. Scott. Suddenly, something slammed into him from behind. He spun, raising his spear gun as a massive, mutated fish lunged at him, its teeth bare. Jake fired instinctively, the spear slicing through the water and embedding itself in the creature's side. It thrashed wildly, but Jake kicked back, avoiding its gnashing jaws. Blood billowed in the water as the fish convulsed, its life draining away. Jake took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. The ocean was teeming with these monsters now, animals driven mad by the pollution, the sudden changes in their habitat. He couldn't let his guard down, not even for a second. He pressed onward, swimming through the crumbling remains of his neighborhood. The apartment building where he'd last seen Lena and Emily loomed ahead, its structure twisted and broken by the force of the tsunami. Jake's heart raced as he swam through the shattered windows and into the building. The inside was a nightmare. Furniture floated in the flooded halls, and debris clogged every corner. He navigated the dark corridors, his eyes scanning for any sign of life. Every inch of this place held memories, his daughter's laughter, his wife's smile. He had to find them. They had to be here. Suddenly, he heard a noise, a faint tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. Jake froze, his heart pounding. Was it a survivor? He followed the sound, moving deeper into the building. His flashlight beam flickered across the water, illuminating the eerie emptiness of the sunken apartment complex. Then he saw a message scratched into the wall, "Safe at the marina." The words were crude but clear. Jake's heart soared with hope. Lena had been here. She and Emily had made it out. he wasn't too late. He swam out of the building, heading toward the marina at the edge of the city. The journey was treacherous, the streets below swarming with sea life, some of it large enough to take him down if he wasn't too careful, but nothing would stop him now. As he approached the marina, Jake noticed something strange. The water here was darker, more turbulent. His instincts told him something was wrong, but he pushed forward, determined to find his family. He swam through the remains of the harbor, his eyes scanning for any sign of life. Then he saw a group of survivors huddled on a floating platform, makeshift tents set up between the remains of old boats. Relief washed over him as he kicked toward them, desperate to see Lena and Emily among them. But as he got closer, he realized something was off. The survivors weren't welcoming, they were armed. "Stop right there." A voice called out. A man, tall and muscular, emerged from the group holding a rusted rifle aimed directly at Jake. His eyes were cold, hardened by weeks of survival in this new world. "I am just looking for my family," Jake said, his voice muffled through the mask. He raised his hands, showing he wasn't a threat. "My wife and daughter, Lena and Emily. Have you seen them?" The man didn't lower his rifle. "There's no room for new people here," he said, his voice flat. "We've got enough problems without taking in stray." Jake's heart sank. These weren't the kind of survivors he was hoping to find. "Please," he said, his voice desperate. "I am not looking for a fight. I just need to know if they were here." The man stared at him for a long moment, then finally lowered his rifle. "They were here," he said, "a woman and a little girl, but they left, headed north with another group." Jake felt a surge of relief mixed with dread. They were alive, but they were still out there somewhere in the vast, dangerous waters of the drowned world, and he wasn't the only one searching for them. Before he could ask more questions, the man nodded to his group, and Jake felt hands grab him from behind. He struggled, but they were too strong. The next thing he knew, he was being dragged into the marina, some murky depths, his gear stripped away as he was thrown into a half-submerged cave. The last thing he saw before the water closed over his head was the cold, emotionless stare of the man with the rifle. Jake thrashed in the water, the taste of salt and metal filling his mouth as he struggled against the cage. The cold metal bars pressed into his skin, and the weight of his soaked gear made it hard to keep his head above water. His captors didn't speak a word as they secured the cage to a broken pier, leaving him submerged up to his neck in the freezing water. He could hear their footsteps fading as they walked away, their voices murmuring as they blended back into the group. Jake forced himself to stay calm, his breath shallow as his mind raced. This was not how he'd imagined his search for Lena and Emily would go, but panic wouldn't help. He surveyed the cage, rusted but sturdy, and ran his fingers along the worn metal, searching for a weakness. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept moving, feeling along the bars for any opening, any chance to escape. There wasn't much time. He had to get out before they came back. The marina was quiet, the gentle sound of waves lapping against the platform above. But below, the world was anything but calm. Dark shapes flickered in the water beneath him, and he could feel the current pulling against the cage. The ocean had become a living, breathing entity full of things that thrived in the chaos left behind by the flood. His fingers scraped against a sharp edge. One of the bars had corroded, just enough to give way if he could apply pressure in the right spot. Jake kicked his legs against the floor of the cage, pushing with his feet to bend the weakened bar outward. It moved slightly, just enough to give him hope. He pressed harder, feeling it give a little more with each push. Suddenly, the surface above rippled, and Jake froze. He watched as a shadow passed overhead, dark and deliberate. Something large was circling the marina, its presence barely noticeable in the low light. His heart thudded as he listened for the sounds of his captors, hoping they hadn't noticed the disturbance. A low growl echoed through the water, vibrating through the cage. Whatever it was close, too close for comfort. Jake redoubled his efforts, pushing against the bar with every ounce of strength he had left. The weakened metal bent further, and with one final shove, it snapped free. Jake wasted no time. He squeezed through the narrow opening, his body scraping against the jagged metal as he pulled himself out. He hit the water, diving deep to avoid being seen, his lungs burning as he swam away from the marina. The cold water numbed his limbs, but the adrenaline kept him moving. He surfaced silently, just far enough from the platform to avoid detection. His eyes scanned the area. The survivors hadn't noticed his escape yet, but they would soon. He couldn't linger. He needed to find a way out, a way to continue his search for Lena and Emily before it was too late. The Myrna stretched into the flooded city, half-submerged boats and debris littering the area. Jake spotted a small skiff bobbing in the water, abandoned but intact. He swam toward it, pulling himself aboard and cutting the rope that tethered it to the dock. His hands shook from the cold, but he managed to work quickly, loosening the boat from its moorings and pushing it into the open water. The boat drifted quietly as Jake paddled with what remained of his strength. He couldn't risk starting the engine. Too much noise would attract attention, both from the survivors and whatever else lurked beneath the surface. He needed to disappear, to vanish into the city's flooded ruins and continue his search alone. The hours passed in a blur as Jake navigated through the sunken city, his eyes scanning the water for any sign of life. The devastation was endless buildings reduced to skeletal remains, streets buried beneath the ocean, such depth, and everywhere the creatures mutated deadly, watching from the shadow. His thoughts kept returning to Lena and Emily, their faces flickering in his mind like a beacon of hope. They had survived, he was sure of it, but every hour that passed made the distance between them seem wider, more impossible to bridge. As dusk fell, Jake spotted movement on the horizon, a flicker of light barely visible through the haze. He squinted, focusing on the distant silhouette. It was a group of people moving between two partially submerged buildings. They were carrying something large, crates stacked on makeshift raft. His heart raced. It had to be them. Lena and Emily could be with that group moving through the city under cover of darkness. Jake paddled closer, careful to stay out of sight. The group was quiet, working quickly to load the crates onto a larger vessel moored nearby. It wasn't TA gang or hostile faction. These were survivors like him. But something felt off. The air around them was tense, like they were on the run. He watched for a few moments, debating whether to approach. He had no guarantee that Lena and Emily were with them, but he couldn't afford to ignore any chance of finding them. He steered the boat toward the group, his hands gripping the sides as he prepared to speak. But before he could make his move, a loud crack echoed through the city. The group scattered, diving for cover as a spray of gunfire erupted from the shadow. Jake ducked, his heart pounding as bullets ricocheted off the water. Someone was attacking the survivor. He turned to see a group of heavily armed figures emerging from the ruins, their faces obscured by masks. They moved with military precision, sweeping through the area with brutal efficiency. The survivors were outnumbered, their makeshift weapons no match for the attackers' firepower. Jake's instincts kicked in, and he paddled away from the scene as quickly as possible. This wasn't his fight. He couldn't afford to get involved, but as he turned to flee, he caught a glimpse of something, a flash of blonde hair, a familiar figure being dragged toward the attackers' boat. Lena. Jake's blood ran cold. He couldn't see Emily, but Lena was there, struggling against her captors as they hauled her aboard. The attackers worked quickly, securing the survivors to the boat and preparing to leave. They weren't killing them. They were taking them somewhere. Without thinking, Jake turned the skiff toward the attackers' vessel, paddling as hard as he could. His mind raced, searching for a plan. He couldn't take on the armed group alone, but he had to do something. He had come too far to lose her now. As he neared the boat, Jake spotted a stack of fuel drums lashed to the side. It was a long shot, but if he could cause a distraction, he might have a chance to get Lena out. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small flare. It was risky. If he missed, the entire boat could go up in flames, taking Lena and the others with it, but he didn't have a choice. With a deep breath, Jake aimed the flare at the fuel drums and fired. The flare hit its mark, igniting the drums with a deafening explosion. The attackers scattered, shouting in panic as the fire spread across the deck. Jake used the chaos to his advantage, paddling alongside the boat and pulling himself aboard. He moved quickly, dodging between the flames as he searched for Lena. The heat was intense, the air thick with smoke, but he pushed forward, his eyes scanning the deck for any sign of her. They're tied to the railing, struggling to free herself. Jake sprinted toward her, his heart pounding as he cut through the ropes with a knife. Lena gasped as she saw him, her eyes wide with shock and relief. "Jake, you alive?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "I am getting you out of here," he said, pulling her to her feet where sat Emily. Lena's face fell, her expression one of terror and heartbreak. They took her. She sent the others on the second boat. Jake's stomach dropped. Emily was still out there in the hands of the attacker. The boat was already pulling away, disappearing into the darkness as the flames consumed the wreckage behind them. Jake tightened his grip on Lena and Nasser, and his mind racing. He couldn't lose them both. He had to find Emily no matter what it took. "I am going after her," he said, his voice firm. "We were getting our family back." Together, they jumped from the burning boat into the dark, cold waters below.